family too. All the things that matter most to you. Real talk, real faith, real life. With God by your side. Through the ups and downs. And helping you turn your life around. From the strongholds of every day. To the blessings that come your way. We'll explore it all with the heart of grace. And a focus on love in a sacred place. Real talk, real faith, real life. With God by your side. Guiding you through the ups and downs. And helping you turn your life around. From the struggles of every day to the blessings that come your way. We'll explore it all with the heart of grace and a focus on love in a sacred place.
Passionate love. You have two independent words, passion and love, fused together to make a strong definition. Passion is the force that drives the love for something. It's the fuel that keeps love going. Love without passion is like a body without a soul. It's like a car without an engine. No movement would happen. And just in case you are wondering how you can tell if someone truly loves you or if you truly love someone, sacrifice. Sacrifice for one another will indicate if you truly love each other. And sacrifice is giving up something for another thing that is far more important. Just like giving up that piece of pie for your girl that is far more important. Or it's the release of something in your possession in an exchange for another thing that you love. This is exactly what God did when He released and sacrificed His only Son, Jesus, just to have us. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him will not perish, but have everlasting life.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining me tonight on Real Talk with Jean Price. Listen, we're getting ready to have a wonderful discussion, and I won't tell you who my guest is just yet, but I'm excited about this topic, I have to say, because I think it's probably one of the things that I know that was so instrumental in my life as I began to grow and develop. And I'm so grateful tonight to be talking about this particular subject, but I want you to go and get your family, your friends. You want to tune in to Real Talk with Jean Price. We have some great things that are going to be coming up between now and the spring. Great things. So you want to follow us on social media, follow us on Facebook. You can watch us on YouTube. We want you to tune in so you can glean, you can grow, and most importantly, you become the person that you've been intended to become. So it is my honor and a privilege to introduce my guest tonight. I'm so excited about her before she comes on stage because I hold her in high value. She's a woman of integrity. She's a woman that to me has been given an assignment. And I tell her this all the time because I believe her assignment is for what we need in a day like today. So help me welcome Dr. Tay Bassett to Real Talk with Jean Price.
Good evening, Lady Price. How are you? It's so good to see you.
Good evening, Dr. Tay. And I really mean what I said. Every time we get together, I now call you, I don't want to call you the trauma queen because that's not what I mean when I say that. But I do feel from a very professional and spiritual perspective, you have been given something that does hold value. And I believe that God gives us all different assignments. And I believe that you've been called really to help those of us have had to go through trauma. But before we get started, Dr. Tay, there's some people that don't know the you that I know. Why don't you tell them who you are?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Tay Bassett. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist, author, associate pastor, mom of two, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Lady Price, once again for inviting me onto this platform, and thank you for all your kind words.
Yes. So tonight, Dr. Tay, we're going to be talking about, are we ready to be loved? We've had so many conversations, you and I, from the trauma perspective, based on your background, based on your experiences. But tonight, you and I were talking backstage. We've never talked about trauma from the relationship perspective. And I know for
Right, right.
myself, right? For me, Dr. Tay, when I began to understand that I needed to get the trauma some, like together in order to be more have a more healthy relationship, for me that was a struggle. But I want to start by asking you a question. Can you share your definition of personal trauma and how it shapes emotions and relational well-being?
Okay. So trauma is honestly not what happens to you. It's how you respond to what happens to you. That's why 10 different people can experience the same event and everyone isn't going to develop PTSD or present with symptoms of trauma because we all process things differently. We all respond to things differently. So trauma is the response. Trauma, it's a holistic experience, so the response is holistic. It's going to affect you physically, so not even if you were like physically attacked, but you're going to feel reactions in your body when you're not only in a traumatic situation, but when you start to relive it or you experience triggers, things like that. It's going to affect you physically, it's going to affect you mentally, so it's going to literally change the way you view yourself,
Yeah,
others, and the
yeah,
world.
yeah,
So we have physical, we have mental. It's going to affect you interpersonally. So
right,
because of those changed perspectives of yourself and others and the world, it's going to affect the way you interact with people. So, and that's the emotional part kind of connects and it's
yeah,
interwoven through all
yeah.
of those things. So
Mm-hmm.
you have these emotions that you might not be able to regulate because of the trauma. You're not going to be able to regulate those emotions in your interpersonal interactions. So they're all interwoven, and that's what creates the trauma response. So, of course, if this kind of becomes a part of you, then it's
Right.
going to affect how you
Yeah.
present to others, how you
Mhm.
present you to others.
Yeah. Dr. Tay, thank you. That was so good. One of the things I want to kind of dive into is how do you recognize, right, that you have unresolved trauma, in your ability to give or receive love? Because that was a biggie for me, right? And I tell, I'm very transparent. So I always telling myself. So I was such an angry person because of the trauma that I went through. And I remember years ago, my babies were little, maybe 5, 6, and whatever toy it was. But I remember one day we were going to McDonald's or something. And Dr. Tate, for no apparent reason, I was angry. My husband's trying to talk to me. My girls are trying to figure out what's wrong with mommy. I was just having this trauma response, but I did recognize that I was really acting out of character. And it was crazy because I couldn't turn it off. So how could somebody how do we recognize? I mean, I did recognize it, but like I said, I couldn't. How does someone recognize it when it's hard to receive? Like my husband wanted to say, "Gene, calm down. It's okay." That's love, but it was hard to receive that.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Sometimes I'll give you an analogy, an
Mhm.
example. Sometimes we don't realize that maybe a button is out of place, or we
Right.
don't realize that our hair is out of place until one of two things happen. We look in a mirror,
Hmm.
or someone tells us.
Right. Right.
And that's when you realize that
Mm.
your trauma is
Yeah.
affecting you. It's
Yeah.
not always like this, epiphany, like, oh my goodness, I went through this when I was 5, and that's why I'm acting like
That's
this at
right.
35. Like it's not always like that. Oftentimes it's not. Sometimes it takes us to hear it from someone else, and we're
Mm.
not always receptive. So
Yeah.
we have to hear it or see it, but also be open to receive it.
Yeah. Yeah. That is so. My struggle, Dr. Tay, during those seasons years ago in my life was criticism, because I always
Mm,
felt there was something wrong with me because of what happened to me. So anytime there was some kind of correction or just anything, honestly, I was defensive, and I
mhm.
felt that I was criticized all the time. How do you work with that? Like how does somebody work with it? That's all I can say.
I'm going to answer your question with a question. So we say, how does someone work with that? The
Yeah,
person
because
who has the trauma, the person who's connected to
interesting.
the person who has the
Both.
trauma.
Both because, like I said, I tell myself, it was hard for my husband at the time to deal with when we talked. I was so defensive. And when he talked, I took everything as criticism. So how was he supposed to handle? Thank God. I mean, this is years ago. And then how does the other person know when not to do it or receive it that way? You know what
Mm,
I'm saying? Because perception or perspective is everything. You got to kind of,
absolutely.
you know what I'm saying? So how to, on both sides.
Mhm, mhm. So I'll speak from the perspective of the person who is connected to. I don't want to say dealing with because that has a negative
Okay.
connotation. Like it's almost like you're
Mm,
tolerating the person, right? But the
right.
person who is
Right.
connected to the survivor of
Mhm.
trauma,
Mhm.
they too have to be open and
Right.
ask questions without making assumptions because sometimes we will handle a person
Mm.
based on how
Yeah.
we think they are, like, oh, that's just how you are,
Right. Right.
so we're going to handle them because as though it's their fault. But sometimes there's a book by Oprah and a psychiatrist, I forget his name right now, but the name of the book is What Happened to You.
Yes, Dr. Tangi.
Instead of asking
Yes. Yep.
why are you like that, ask what happened to you,
Mhm.
or why do you think you're feeling this way. And I'm not saying that everybody should marry a therapist. I mean, we're decent people, but like, I'm not saying you have to be a therapist,
Right.
but sometimes you have to ask those questions that shows the person that, hey, I want to know, I want to learn,
Yeah.
I want to understand, I want to hold space. And sometimes when you show up that way,
Mhm.
that's how the other person feels vulnerable enough to share,
Yes.
what they're feeling, and
Mhm.
share their thoughts, and be comfortable enough to say, I feel like you're criticizing
Mhm.
me. That's where the conversation starts.
Yeah.
Because that's an opportunity for the other person to say, I'm sorry that's how you perceive it. That's not how I was intending it.
Absolutely.
Maybe I can change my words.
Yeah.
When there's a willingness and openness, it's bi-directional, then that's when the work can really happen.
Oh, I like that bi-directional. And I was going to mention, Dr. Tay, I had my trauma. My husband had his trauma. So it was just like playing tennis, ping
Mhm.
pong, trauma, hitting trauma, trauma, hitting trauma. It took us, because we're talking about love, right? We're talking about relationship. It took it took God for us to get to the point that you were talking about where we were able to receive each other without there being triggers and then the triggers causing a response.
Right.
That really just, if I can tell, that was a big one for us in our relationship. So communication had to be something. It was a lot of work. It was truly, truly a lot of work. So what are some of the most common ways that trauma manifests in like relationships or people with divorce or we're dealing with different married couples now. Bishop and I we're counseling what people are really going through, Dr. Tay, and yet it's traumatic. So what are some of the common ways trauma manifests in relationships?
So many different ways. So we started out and I talked about the physical,
Mhm.
the mental, the emotional, and the interpersonal. And all of those things can come up in a relationship because, especially if it's like a marriage, you're connected, you're one.
Yeah.
So whatever you're bringing, whatever you're experiencing, it's going to manifest in that
Mhm.
relationship. So I'll go down those four and just give examples. So
Right.
emotional, you mentioned always being angry,
Yes.
and it affected your family. In that
Mhm.
moment at McDonald's,
Mm.
you couldn't even put words to how you were feeling or why you were feeling it, but the anger was palpable. They could feel it and they were responding to it.
Mhm.
So, you going through your own emotional changes and having challenges regulating your emotions, not being able to name the emotions,
Yes.
not being able to understand why you're feeling that way, it's going to affect your partner.
Mhm.
They can, the people in the world say, matching energy. But if you are feeling, let's pick any emotion. If you're feeling angry, you can't articulate why. Eventually, because that's in the atmosphere and you're
Mhm.
just kind of, somebody's going to pick up on it, especially
Absolutely.
children.
Oh,
I know we're talking about like
absolutely.
marriage, but
But
the
no, you're
parent child
right. That's
relationship,
right. Yeah. Yeah.
especially children, if they're young, they're going to
Mhm.
see that, oh, mommy always responds with this emotion, daddy
Mhm.
always responds with this emotion. So they're automatically going to respond in that way because that's what they're taught.
Yeah.
Not intentionally, but that's what they're observing.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
learn by observation. So that's the emotional piece. The physical piece, if we're talking about a marriage, let's say, your trauma had to deal with some kind of personal violation, physical violation.
Mm-hmm.
You might realize that you don't want to be touched.
Mm-hmm. Went through
And
that.
what if your and what if your partner's love language is physical touch?
That's a good one, Dr. Tay. Yes.
Then it's going to seem like, oh, you don't want to be with me. You're not
Mm-hmm.
interested in me.
Yes.
When the person is literally responding as though they're going through the trauma all over again. But if you don't ask the questions, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
open, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
willing,
Yeah.
then you will never know that. And you're going to think it's a you problem when it's not a problem, it's something to be worked through. So
Yes.
that's the physical.
Mm-hmm.
Then you have the mental. Your perspective on things changes when you go through trauma.
Yeah.
Let's say you go through one traumatic experience.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine those who have complex trauma, complex PTSD,
Yeah.
and they've gone through the same trauma over time, or they've experienced multiple instances
Yeah.
of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So they're thinking that the world is bad, the world is scary, nobody can be trusted. Let's put a pin there. Trust
Mm-hmm.
issues. We always talk about,
Yes.
oh, trust, I got trust issues. It's a real thing.
It
So
is.
let's take a hypothetical. Let's say your trauma involved someone you trusted, a family member, a
Mm-hmm.
caretaker.
Mm-hmm.
So that experience showed you that no matter how close they are, no matter how much they smile and support you, that you can't trust them. That can
Mm-hmm.
actually absolutely show up in a relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely,
So
Dr.
you can't trust anybody, so
Right.
you're not trusting
Mm-hmm.
your partner to manage the finances,
Right.
something that's seemingly not related.
Mm.
And then interpersonally, it's going to affect the way you communicate. Because
Yeah.
if you're always on the defensive, if you're always angry, if you're always on edge, if you're always thinking that everybody is out to do you wrong, it's going to come out in your language.
Yeah. 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 You said something, one of the things you said was so true about the love language. My husband's
Mhm.
love language is affection, but my trauma caused non-affection. So you're so right.
Exactly.
And again, I'm so like this is like 20, 30 years ago. But to your point, the very thing that he needed, I wasn't able to give. And the very thing I needed, I wasn't able to receive. So that caused it. You
Exactly.
know what I'm saying, Dr. Tay? It caused that
Hmm.
love to just be bouncing off the other. So we really had to go through a lot of healing in
Hmm.
our relationship when it came to love and different things like that. So what is the first step that someone even takes to start healing from the trauma so that they can accept love? I don't want to talk about I don't want to say receive. I guess it could be synonymous, but to accept it. Because the Bible tells us that we're accepted in God, but sometimes we don't even accept his love.
That's a mic drop.
Come on.
That is a mic
Let me
drop.
drop the mic. Pop.
Hmm.
Right? Yeah. Sometimes.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I think it starts with an openness, that
Mm-hmm.
willingness to look in the mirror, that willingness to be vulnerable, that
Oh,
willingness to say, you know what? The way I'm behaving, perceiving, it's not healthy for me. And
yes.
how can you tell if something isn't healthy? If it's leaving you feel drained, like people are
Mm,
siphoning energy from you. If your response is always anger, just really taking an inventory. Like, why am I responding this way? Because a
mm,
lot of people will function like this is just how I am. I'm just angry.
right.
But if you really give yourself the opportunity, if you create space to
Mm-hmm.
reflect on that,
Mm-hmm.
then maybe like journaling, then maybe you can, oh, maybe it started then. And that's one of the questions I often ask clients. They'll
Mm-hmm.
share a certain sign or symptom. When did that start? Was
Yes.
there anything significant that happened
Mhm.
around that time?
Right. Right.
And more often than not, oh yeah, I haven't been getting sleep and being anxious, and that happened around the time insert trauma here happened. So you have to be willing. You have to be open to look in that mirror or have, have get that response or that feedback from someone. And
Mm.
then you said, sometimes we can't accept God's love. That's deep.
I mean,
If
like,
we call
yeah,
ourselves
come
believers
on. Yes.
and we have difficulty accepting love from
Mm-hmm.
our Father,
Come on.
then it's really going to be really
Yes.
difficult to
Yes.
accept love from anybody
That's right.
in this here earth
No, you're
realm.
right. You're right. Yeah.
So it might I could say that we can start by healing our relationship with God. Not that God did anything wrong, but some of us have
Mhm.
um a distorted view of
Mm,
what a relationship looks like
yes.
because maybe our religion or our faith was used against us. There is such a thing as religious trauma, but I'm sorry,
Yes.
that's a
Yes.
that's a
That's
different
another
episode,
show.
right?
You're right, though. Yes.
Some of us are judging our relationship with God based on our relationships with man when it
Mm,
should be the other way around.
absolutely.
So we're
Absolutely.
just like, oh, I can't trust that God will do exceeding abundantly above all I
Mhm.
ask or think. I can't trust that because I couldn't trust my father.
Right.
And for some people, it's not that conscious, it's unconscious.
Yes.
So we could start by taking inventory of our relationship with God.
Mm, wow. And Dr. Tag, I really feel that I'm grateful for you mentioning that my relationship with Christ is so strong because I learned, I feel like God, I feel like the woman with the alabaster box. And the Bible talks about how
Mm,
she worshiped the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair and her tears. He is such a loving God that because of the trauma that I went through because of my stepfather, thank you for bringing that God really became my father whom I love. And one of the things that I try to share with women and girls when I'm ministering, whether they're my mentee or whatever, is that it is so important to understand. Thank you for sharing. God's love is not like man's love. Man and man, whether it be male or female, it's just not like that. God truly loves us unconditionally. You don't have to pretend. You don't have to act like. Sometimes I went through a season. You pretend that you're something that you're not. With God, you just come. He just takes you
mhm.
as you are. He builds you, but he takes you as you are. So then, could trauma ever fully be healed? Or is it something that you think people have to learn to manage over time?
Think that it can be both.
Oh, I like
We
that.
serve a God who is omnipotent.
Ah,
So he could legitimately erase the very memory from your
mm.
brain.
I felt that when you said that. Yes, yes, yes,
But sometimes, like the thorn
yes,
in the
yep.
side,
Uh huh.
sometimes the thorn is left there. See,
Yes.
I did a quick word study one day, and the I believe it's either Hebrew or Greek, but the Hebrew or Greek for trauma,
Mm-hmm.
no, trauma in Hebrew or Greek means wound. That's how it's translated.
Yes. Okay.
Sometimes the wound is left there,
Mm-hmm.
not as a reminder of the pain, but a reminder of God's willingness and ability to heal.
Oh,
So
oh, yes.
sometimes he's
Mm-hmm.
not going to give us a mind eraser and take it away.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's a matter of managing it. So I was just sharing with a client earlier. It's not a matter of forgetting the trauma or no longer having the trigger. But you'll find that as you do the work, as you learn the skills, as you go to therapy, as you become vulnerable, all of those things, that
Mm-hmm.
the trigger is not as triggering.
Oh,
It's
wow.
just
Wow. Yeah.
it's just like grief.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
you initially lose a loved one, there's a smell, there's a scent, there's a sight. You automatically go to tears.
Hmm.
Now, 20 years later, it doesn't mean that you forgot,
Oh,
but you manage your response in a different way.
yes. Yes.
Transparency. I lost my grandfather in 2008. I know different kind of relationship. Lost him in 2008. He used to drive buses, right?
Right.
2009, see a bus, snotting, crying. See a bus stop,
Wow.
hot mess. But now I might see a bus stop and smile to myself. You see the
Yes.
difference? That
Absolutely.
takes work, that takes time.
That's really good. Yes.
And I
Yes.
think that in and of itself can be healing. The
Yes.
fact that you can face it, but
Mm.
not succumb to it and not be overwhelmed by it.
Wow.
So I think trauma, there's a dual process there. Yes, there's healing, but it doesn't mean you're going to forget. It
Mhm.
just means that you're going to be better able to manage it.
That was great, Dr. Tay, by the way. That was really good. On that
You
note,
create spaces
listen,
for gems.
well, I'm just saying, I'm sitting, I can listen to Dr. Tay, and I'm not saying, I never have to fluff her up. I'm being honest. I keep telling you, she has the professionalism and the spiritual side of really breaking through this trauma. I mean, God has given her something with to deal with it. So listen, we're going to take a commercial break, and we're going to hear more from Dr. Tay. We're going to continue talking about, are we ready for love? We'll be right back.
Passionate love. You have two independent words, passion and love, fused together to make a strong definition. Passion is the force that drives the love for something. It's the fuel that keeps love going. Love without passion is like a body without a soul. It's like a car without an engine. No movement would happen. And just in case you are wondering how you can tell if someone truly loves you or if you truly love someone, sacrifice. Sacrifice for one another will indicate if you truly love each other. And sacrifice is giving up something for another thing that is far more important. Just like giving up that piece of pie for your girl that is far more important. Or it's the release of something in your possession in an exchange for another thing that you love. This is exactly what God did when He released and sacrificed His only Son, Jesus, just to have us. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in Him will not perish, but have everlasting life.
Sorry, I had to unmute. My apologies. But welcome back to Real Talk with Jean Price. We've been having such a phenomenal conversation. Are you ready for love? With Dr. Tay Bassett. Dr. Tay, come on back to Real Talk. I'm so excited and ready to dive back in. And what's beautiful about this conversation is that it's right before Valentine's Day. And maybe this could be the year that our perspective about love changes. I think for me, and I was just sharing with somebody, Dr. Tay, that I'm in a place in my life, even more so, where I really appreciate the love of God. When I think about the things He's done, the things He's gotten me through, I tell you, are you ready for love, Dr. Tay? So, well, let's continue. Dr. Tay, many people struggle with vulnerability after they've been hurt, right? So they kind of shut down on love. How can they trust again?
I will say it's easier said than done
Yes. Yeah.
because the words you used were when they've been hurt,
Yes.
they shut down on love. What do
Mhm.
we tell children to do? We tell them not to touch the hot stove. And what do? They touch the hot stove. And after that, what do? They don't touch the
Right,
stove.
right, right.
So you're not going to go back to what hurt you. So if you were hurt in a relationship, one of two things can happen. One, you can go back to relationships, trying to dive into relationship after relationship to in some way fix what
Mm,
happened when you were hurt, or you'll avoid relationships like the plague.
good point. Good point.
So it's either you're going to dive in
Right.
or avoid. What was your question? Because I went on a tangent. I'm sorry, Lady Price.
No, no. You said something that was no, you're on point because I was talking about vulnerability when you've been hurt. But that's a great
Mhm.
point because you're right. Either you're gonna dive in or you're gonna retract. But I think, in
Mhm.
my opinion, Dr. Tay, both of those can be extremes. Because of
Absolutely.
the hurt, right? You can dive in, maybe not being healed, and that's too much, or you can retract, and that's not good either. So then, how do we find the balance of
That's a
dealing
really
with
good
the
question.
vulnerability? And it is
Mhm.
hard. I've had my own, and you have your story. Many women we talk to have that story, and it's like,
Right,
how do you do it?
right. It's really tough, just like in any situation, it's tough to find the happy medium. But
Mm,
and it's also difficult for us to find that sweet spot because
yeah.
we don't have a representation or model of what a healthy relationship
Mm,
looks like.
okay, that's it. Yeah.
When I counsel my couples, one of the questions that I ask them is, what were your relationship examples and models?
Hmm. Hmm.
And some of them will say, no one in my family is married, or everyone in my family has been divorced, or, I have this one aunt and uncle who, have this loving marriage and I've wanted to, you know.
Yeah,
So we have to look at what we're surrounded by, what examples we're functioning based on, and
that's
also identify what's healthy.
right. Right.
Some of us don't know.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
going to take
Absolutely.
therapy. It's going to take changing our circle and,
Mhm.
adjusting our perspective.
Yeah. You know, Dr. Tay, I heard someone recently said to Bishop, I want a marriage like you and Pastor Gene.
I'm sure you two hear that a lot.
I do. But can I tell you, Dr. Tay, my response was it came with a cost because it goes to what you're saying about the work that it takes to get to where you are, right? And then my other response was, I don't want people to have a marriage like us. I want them to
Hmm.
have a marriage according to the word of God and what
Right.
God says about marriage. And I said to my husband, I said, I don't want that kind of, I don't think we should, not that we're doing it on purpose, that's not how we are, but I don't want people to see that as promotion. Oh, I want to be like Bishop. I want to be like Pastor G. No, no, no. Strive to be like God. The only difference, Dr. Tay, is that they don't know my story.
Hmm.
You know what
Hmm.
I'm
They
saying?
know the glory, but not the story.
Come on. Because I could say I want to be like you because you be dropping nuggets left and right. Be like, I mean, I could flow in one area, but the flow that you in your area, I can't flow there. And I could say I want that. But Dr. Tay, can I really walk where you've been?
Mm.
Oh God, I'm sorry. I felt that from
And
two.
likewise.
You know what I'm saying?
And
Can I
likewise.
really go where Dr. Tay has been? I just think that it's so we have to be careful to say sometimes we want to be like, I get the intent. I don't want you to I get it. You know, people look at I look at you as an example, other people look at you, they look at us. But I just think we should be real careful to strive more like be like the Christ in us. You know what
Mm.
I'm not trying to even be super spiritual. I really mean what I say. You, I just
Mhm.
want people to be more like Christ. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
how do we set healthy boundaries without being closed off? I think that's a good one because it goes back to the trust, to the hurt that you mentioned.
Right.
So let's talk about those healthy boundaries. What do we do?
I always tell clients that healthy boundaries are not walls, or
Oh,
walls with no windows and no doors.
that's
A
good.
healthy boundary has a door or a window.
Mm,
Why? Because one, especially for the survivor of trauma, I always say that when you go through a traumatic experience,
yes.
you feel like you don't have control. So when you're setting boundaries, if there's a door in your wall, you
Hmm.
have control over who comes in and who goes out. You have control over when, where, why, and how. But if it's just a wall with cinder blocks and there's no opening, no one can get in, but also, how are you going to get out?
Mm.
So healthy boundaries have openings.
I have to tell you something. I've never heard it explained like that. That was really good. It really because that makes sense. No, it really makes sense. I have to tell you
Mhm.
when you think about what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. There's a
Mhm.
door. That's really good. I'm sorry. I just had to say that. It was really good. Wow.
But it's true. And the if you're really thinking about a wall, like
Yeah.
think about the Great Wall of China. I've never been. I've seen
Right.
pictures, but I
Yeah.
feel like there are certain little openings
Yeah. Yeah.
as you make your way down the wall.
Mhm.
You
Mm.
can look out, you can see, you can observe. And that's another thing. If there's an opening in your wall, in your boundary, you're able to observe and assess if
Yes. Yes.
things are
Yes.
safe.
Yeah, that's where I was going. Because that's what I was going to ask you, Dr. Tay. I'm so glad you led to that. Is it how can partners create that safe and supportive space for each other to grow and heal? Because that's important too. How do they kind of create that?
So there's this one modality in therapy called dialectical behavior therapy, DBT, and
Mm,
it was created for one particular um, diagnosis. But over time, like because it's so skills focused, I really believe, and a lot of clinicians believe that it can be used in any situation. Like even
oh,
if you have no psychological diagnosis, DBT skills can help you.
okay.
And Some of the skills are, excuse me, being non-judgmental,
Mm-hmm.
observe, participate, and describe. And I think that would apply, that can very much apply for partners. So
Okay.
what do I mean by non-judgmental?
Right.
These are ways that you can be non-judgmental. Observe. So
Yes.
you look before responding. Because in
Mm-hmm.
the McDonald's situation, Bishop might have observed, okay, she's angry. There must be something going on. So
Right.
he observed that. He could have just said, get it together.
Right.
The girls see you.
Yeah.
Get it together, right? So observing before responding.
Mm-hmm.
Describe. So maybe when you get home, and thank you for letting me, use this example, but maybe
Oh,
when you get
for
home
sure.
instead of saying, Jean, what's wrong with you? I feel
Mhm.
weird just saying Jean. Lady Jean, like what's going on? What was going on back there?
Right. Right. Right.
Instead of, coming at it from, that kind of confrontational perspective,
Right.
describing. I noticed that,
Mm.
you were really tense. I even saw that your shoulders were up near your ears.
Mm-hmm.
So because maybe it wasn't anger, it was fear.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are describing what you observed instead of talking
Mm-hmm.
about what you assumed, it
Mm-hmm.
makes for a completely different situation,
That's
different
so,
conversation.
so
And
true.
also participate. So participate in conversations. It might be difficult, and this is for people on both ends. Participate in the conversation instead of drawing back and shutting down,
Yes.
even if it feels uncomfortable,
Mm-hmm.
because
Yeah.
sometimes it's the discomfort that's
Mm-hmm.
going to lead to the healing, that's going to lead to the
Yes.
vulnerability, that's going to lead to the understanding. There's a lot of uncomfortable things that we go through as people that we need to go through in order to get to the promise, to get to the healing.
Wow.
We're
And you.
both moms.
Mhm.
Childbirth,
Right.
painful. I don't
Yeah.
care how many drugs they give you, right?
Painful. Right.
But you have to go through that in order to
Mm-hmm.
have the bouncing baby boy, the bouncing baby
Right.
girl.
Right. Right.
That's the case in so many situations in life. We have to go through the difficulty. You
Mm-hmm.
shared publicly about your degree. I'm
Yes.
sure it was difficult
Yes.
sometimes,
Oh,
but you had to go
absolutely.
through it.
Yes.
You
Yes.
had to actively participate in the process in order to get the outcome.
Yeah. So true. And
So I would
Dr.
say
No, go ahead. Mm-mm. Okay.
observe, describe. I like to repeat: observe,
Yes, but I love
describe,
it.
and
Love it.
participate as a means of being non-judgmental.
Yeah. I was going to say that you said something that was also so key about being uncomfortable. It's interesting how your mind can tell you, like you said, that to be uncomfortable makes you afraid and make you draw back. But to your point,
Mhm.
when I realized some 30 something years ago, I needed to go through that process, my healing was waiting for me the whole time. And I could have had healing.
That's so good.
You understand what I'm saying? I could have had healing such a long time ago. But because of
Yeah.
the uncomfortability, it was like, no, no. So thank you for sharing that, because I think sometimes we can, excuse the expression, self sabotage our own healing in time. In
Absolutely. Yeah, because we're so familiar with the discomfort that we're
absolutely,
afraid what it's going to be like on the other end. So it's better it's
absolutely.
what do they say? Like the devil you know is better than the devil you don't know or
Yeah.
whatever. I don't
Oh,
want to know none of them. But
right,
like
right.
even though it's uncomfortable, it's familiar.
Yeah,
And what's unfamiliar is way too scary to even pursue.
it
So
is.
sometimes that's why we sit in our discomfort. We'll stay in our trauma response.
Mm,
Even those, it's one thing if you don't realize that what you experienced was traumatic and how it's affecting you. But once you realize it
mhm.
and you don't address it, some people don't address it because it's scary. You don't
Yeah,
know how many times people
so
have told
true.
me, you know, I don't want to go to therapy because I'm afraid of what might be unearthed.
Yes, I believe that. But Dr. Tay, I believe that. I believe necessary, but I do believe what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Dr. Tay, we only have a few minutes. I know you have to, something, your prior engagement. Last few words that you would say, because and I always say this when we get together, but I really do think this is a part two, because I think we really honestly just touched the surface of understanding, are we really ready for love? Because love is
Mhm.
such a strong word, and it has such a strong meaning. Final words before we close tonight,
I always go with what first comes to my mind. God is love.
please. Yeah.
And I know that's so simple. It's
Absolutely.
just like that's what, but seriously,
Mhm.
and if we go back to that fundamental
Oh, come on. Yes.
tenet of our faith, we can learn so much about God. We
Yeah.
can learn so much about ourselves and
Hmm.
learn so much about how we relate to others. So if you start from the source, one of my favorite scriptures because it can apply in so many areas, the
Yes.
oil flows from the head to the beard and to the skirts. So if
Yes.
you start up here with your relationship with God and you
Hmm.
gain better understanding and you learn what it's like to be intimate with God,
Hmm.
then you can't help but allow that oil to flow in other areas of your life.
Oh my gosh, this is so good. Dr. Tan, I want to say something really quick. I know we have about 1 minute. The simplicity of your words that you just said outweighs anything else that could have been said greater. Because sometimes we poo poo simplicity, and that was great. God is
Mm,
love. It was just, it was so simple, but it resonated so deep to remember that it's the love of God which is shed abroad in our hearts by the Holy Spirit. It's just that simplicity that has carried us, that has kept us, and is actually grooming us to be the women that we're supposed to be in Him. Dr. Tay, I love you. Thank you
I
so
love
much
you
for being
too.
on Real Talk. We're gonna do a part two to this, and I'm so grateful for our guests that chimed in tonight. Angela Brooks chimed in, and she was saying, "I totally understand that traumatic experiences can leave a lasting effect." Michelle Bassett tunes in, and she said, "Thank you for this forum." And Michelle, listen, I know relation, but listen on the next one.
Hey,
I know,
mommy.
I know, Mom. Listen, your daughter, she knows she means a lot to me. And we always seem to carve out. The Bible talks about iron sharpening iron. And that's
Mhm.
exactly every time that this happens. So thank you, guests, for tuning in. Dr. Tay, I'll see you next time on Real Talk
Yes.
with Dean Price. Love you much.
Thank you. Love you. Bye.